Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Fragrantica Talks, where I'm joined with Adam Frosiati and John Beeble. And today we're going to be talking about a prompt that I put to the team earlier this week, which is fragrances that could be interpreted as winter sunshine. So, scents that fit that brief. And I wanted to put that to the guys because it's got very cold here in York, and we're definitely in winter now, and so I felt like I needed a little bit of winter sunshine in my life. So Adam and John, I'm interested how you've interpreted this brief and what winter sunshine means to you.
Well, you know, Nicola, that I despise everything under 60 Fahrenheit in terms of temperature. So I'm with you. I need that in my life all the time. Once a certain times of year come rolling around, the direction I took it was, uh, I suppose, back and forth. I'm a very seasonal perfume wearer, but both by necessity as well as choice. I almost never enjoy incredibly intense like beast mode perfumes, but when I do, for me it has to be when the weather is cold, so that they're not like exploding off the skin as frenetically as they would during summer. So suffice it to say, when I do find a perfume that bucks my expectation of like seasonal perfume wearing and something that I end up reaching for all year round for different reasons, I tend to make note of those. So I chose just a few, just two or three fragrances that I wear year round and that bring me joy, even when it's a little cold, a little colder than my liking. How about you, John?
In some ways, I agree with both of you on many things, but I definitely part ways with Adam here. Like, I love winter. I love the cold. I just feel like it's a very it's part of my upbringing. I grew up at the top of a very big hill, so I grew up sledding in the snow all the time. So it was like, to get a good snow and for it to be cold was just the most exciting thing possible ever.
Said by the owner of a perfume brand literally called January.
Yes, right. Exactly. So it had a very, snow, whether there is sun or not, is almost indifferent. One of my favorite books growing up as a child is this book that I highly recommend called The Snowy Day. If you've ever seen it, it's one of the greatest children's illustrated books. And I was just looking it up. The author is Ezra Jack Keats. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But to that notion, though, that I thought that this prompt was really actually very special, and I'm glad you brought it up, Nicola, because there's something interesting about that interplay of cold, because obviously when it's cold outside, but you still see the sun, there's like sort of two things happening at the same time, and it's just like creates kind of optical effects. You're kind of reminded of warmer times when at the same time it is kind of cold outside. It also kind of makes you think of what's coming in the future, but there's also something just really beautiful about, like, light glinting on things in the landscape despite the cold air. Like, I love that whole thing. And there's a lot of scents that mimic or mirror that, I think, from the landscape. So it was such a cool idea. And I think we tend to think of things as being a little bit more monolithic. And this is a very mixed state idea, which really interested me. But I'd love to hear what brought you to the idea, Nicola, and what it makes you think of, and if you could maybe share a perfume with us too.
Sure. So I love that you went really deep and philosophical with it, and kind of winter sunshine glinting. I just wanted some fragrances that are nice and warm. I wanted scents that are happy and cheerful, and maybe reminds me of that kind of glowy sunshine, crackling fireside type stuff.
Mm.
Just fragrances that I think wear very well in the winter and fare quite well in the cold air, but which not necessarily reminds me of summer, but warm me up somehow. Like that kind of when it's cold and you get a bit of sunshine and it still has heat in it, and it's really pleasant. That feeling of sunshine on your bones when it's a really bitingly cold day. And I've really recently had a bit of a revelation about myself, which is I've decided I really like cold weather. I don't like being cold, but I love cold weather. because we had a cold snap here. And I've also been spending some time in the very, very, very north of Scotland. And it's a lot colder there. And it was lovely. And it was a pleasure to go out, even though it wasn't. It was quite uncomfortable at times. But to kind of get wrapped up and go out and then come in and be like, oh, it's lovely and warm inside. It was just really nice. So yeah, I think I'm with John on this one. I think winter might be where it's at these days. Oh yes, so to kick us off with a fragrance, I've got quite a few, and what I've tried to do with this prompt is I've tried to almost like take a few different ways of interpreting it, and so I've got like a summery scent, a citrus that's good for the winter, and so maybe I'll start with that one because I've teased that now. So the one I wanted to bring first is Isfarkand by Ormonde Jayne, which is a very, very citrus heavy composition. And I suppose this is reminiscent of the summer, but it works really well in winter. It actually works at all times of year, really. It's a perfume which is 20 years old. And, you know, in today's perfume market where we talk about how quickly things move and how, you know, how something's out and released and gone, forgotten about, well, a perfume to be one of the brand's big sellers still 20 years later, I think is a real testament to how good it is. So this was originally composed for Linda, the owner of Ormonde Jayne, for her husband, without the pink pepper top note. And then they reformulated, added the pink pepper top note, and it's basically continued since then. It's so sunny and cheerful, and it has quite a sexy, musky base, but that's below this just real abundance of bright, lively citruses. And so when I smell it, I have that kind of lemon, orange, bergamot association of that kind of summery fruits. You know, they even look like little suns, some of them, don't they? And it's an incredibly easy to wear perfume. It's very, very unisex. And I just think it's a really cracking perfume. And I think it's really impressive that it's lasted for so long, you know, in the niche world, which moves very quickly. And it's elegant, it's uplifting, it's everything that I want in a perfume for winter. So yeah, that's my first pick. Isfarkand.
It sounds a bit like because I've smelled a number of her fragrances, and it sounds like that is kind of part of her signature, isn't it? The that citrus and pink pepper top, which is like so wonderfully particular to her brand, and then that sort of like musk at the bottom as well, which I wonder if because of the success of that, you know, she realized, this is kind of my voice that I want to carry through. Because I know there's a number of other perfumes that have that as part of their structure, you know.
Yeah. Isfarkand, it appeals to me because it's the most citrusy that I've smelled out of the lot. And it's the one where the citrus feels like it takes up the largest bulk in the top and the mid portion of the scent, only then becoming musky later on. So you get the real sort of whoosh of the pink pepper and the citruses to start off with, and that lingers for quite a long time. I should say it's a fragrance with really great longevity. You know, and I know citruses, people often complain about how they don't last very long, but this one does. Certainly on my skin, it's it lasts all day, and particularly where you might get it on your jumper or whatever, it definitely the next day will still smell of it, for me personally. So yeah, it's just it's a really classical scent that I think, you know, I don't advocate blind buying very often, and I know buying scents for presents is really hard, but if you were to come to me and say I want a citrus as a present for somebody, this is one of the ones that I would suggest, because I think it has got a really appealing nature.
Well, you know, my first pick is a bit of a citrusy one, and you know, I think maybe it's probably the most similar to, you know, Nicola's concept of response to this prompt that I'm going to get. among my selections. So it might be a great transition here. You know, the three of us all live on like the northern half of the northern hemisphere, right? And as residents of that area of this broad geographical region, you know, we all are kind of used to the idea of like holidays, vacations, what have you, being, you know, in the winter. At least I think that's true for all three of us. At least, you know, I know that in England specifically, and in France, and, you know, specific areas like that, there's this idea of like the summer holiday. Less so in the United States. I think for us, it's like, you know, people who work office jobs tend to want to take their vacations in the winter, and they go to warm places because they live in the north. So with that kind of attitude in mind, I chose you know, something that is literally meant to evoke a sense of like warm place, based on its sort of concept, and that's Paris Riviera from Chanel. I don't own many Chanels. I don't even necessarily always like too many of them. I mean, it's certainly a you know, a hallmark house of in most respects for the fragrance industry. But what I liked about this, and really every part of the Le O with an X de Chanel line, are you know, for my taste, you know, these really stand out as distinct from the rest of the line insofar as they're trying to be, you know, light wearing, effervescent, sort of eau de cologne, eau de toilette kind of types of perfumes that, you know, they are not meant to be, you know, huge projection performers, but they are definitely very, you know, for lack of a better term, pretty. You know, they're shimmery, they're pretty, they're you know, meant to evoke the places that they're named after, and every single one of them, because, you know, Chanel likes to let you know that they're what matters most. Every single one of them has Paris in the title, and then dash the place that they're named after. I thought that was a very strange way to do that. So this one, the Paris Riviera, I you know, I this line again, it's literally meant to transport the senses, and that's a direct quote from Chanel's blandly phrased website. What I'm taking that to mean is that they are definitely trying to evoke that kind of vacation type of mindset in the wearer, and in that respect, I think they really succeed, especially with this one. You know, it's probably not the most original scent concept. It's like, you know, a warming orange blossom that's a little bit beachy, a little bit more classical French bouquet, but it's not powdery at all. And it's paired with some really nice classic biting Chanel citruses. Again, it might not sound like the most exciting choice, but I find it to be very comforting all year round, but specifically in the winter, because I think in the cooler weather, it performs in a way where, you know, that darker, muskier part of the orange blossom accord is a little bit more alive and full-bodied. That might otherwise get kind of washed out in heat. It's brilliant in the heat as well, but for very different reasons. You know, this combination of orange blossom and jasmine and orange peel, it's just so pretty and so easy to wear and reach for. And sometimes when the weather is cool on my end, I just like to, you know, go for something that's comforting, and that this is, you know, almost always in the top few things that I think of immediately when I think of like comfort and joy and brightness. So I think for that reason, it really fits the prompt.
With that sort of lighter profile and kind of character, does it stand up to cold weather though, or does cold weather kill it?
Well, you know, quizzically it doesn't. And I think it's really owed to, you know, two key things. One, the florals they chose to highlight the most, obviously orange blossom, which again has that kind of like musky, like sweet kind of presence that, you know, some like wispier flowers like lily wouldn't have. The jasmine accord in this is not necessarily, you know, indolic or animalic, but, you know, jasmine can be rendered in a very full-bodied way, and I would say that this really toes a very fine line between like full-bodied floral accord, which with like that almost meat-like characteristic, and something much more like, you know, thin John Claude Elena like. this really straddles a line in between. And then the second thing that I think Chanel does very well with this is they add a very, hefty dose of, a musk arrangement that keeps it sort of alive on the skin for a while, but also provides like a backbone of like a scent profile that is a little bit more robust to survive in the cold.
Great.
John, I think you're a fan of this line, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because it definitely came to the various low line fragrances definitely crossed my mind when this topic came up. So that I thought, oh, that's interesting that you reached there, right? Because they are refreshing in a way that I haven't really seen before. I find them wildly successful as perfumes because of the fact that they're just so, effervescent, pleasurable. Like they do things that a lot of other perfumes don't. And in fact, in the cold weather, I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't it be nice? Like, it's sort of like, having a sort of tropical cocktail in the middle of winter. Like, you're allowed to do that, and it's okay, and it's interesting. I'm curious now to try one of those now in winter, after your suggestion. So that's a pretty neat idea, I gotta say. So I will go ahead with a choice. I just had no science behind this at all. I just kind of picked some things that just struck me, as interesting wares. One of them I realized is kind of unusual. This isn't something I reach for a lot, but when I do, it feels really good. And this is Paloma Picasso's Minotaure. This is an interesting fragrance. This is from the early 90s, and it's been in production really since then. And I love to, it's really fun to smell this again, because it's, it has definitely a kind of a 90s-ish feel to it, in that it's got a lot of everything in it. But what it has mostly, to my mind, is it has a lot of fruit, and it has a lot of geranium in here. And I noticed that a couple things I picked have geranium in it, which is kind of, again, I wouldn't have, thought that, like, oh goodness, geranium in winter, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But maybe that's the point, is that sort of representative of that sunshine, or like a plant that to me collects a whole lot of sunshine, or kind of pulls in sunshine. But this, for me, there's also like tonka bean and some sandalwood and vetiver, and it's one of these really like nicely balanced, like a whole bunch of different like materials that's really nicely balanced into a sort of slightly fougere-ish structure, but that kind of sweet, more fruity type of fougere, almost a little bit like in that the way that when they made that sort of men's version of Giorgio Beverly Hills, had that kind of big old burst of like tons of fruit and stuff like that in it. But I think it's probably that mixture of fruitiness, the earthiness from geranium. There's also a bunch of aldehydes in the beginning with some bergamot. It's got a little bit of everything, but it's very bright. And I think, again, like I said initially, I was thinking about that sort of glint of light on snow, or that certain slant of light you have, really, because you have less light in this time of day at this time of the year. So I think that when you do see it, it kind of has a little bit more meaning or something. Maybe I'm reading more into it than I need to, but this sort of reflects that to me too. When you wear it, it has a big old burst of smell that's very sweet and bright, and it eventually fades off to a pretty nice little, like, gently woody musk at the end. But it seemed to fit this brief really well. Yeah, it's.
I don't know, like, Minotaur as a name makes me think of, like, dark places and dark mythology and, hidden things. And
Yeah.
so it's quite an interesting, what you presented it, this sort of interesting bouquet that feels very summery and effervescent and bright and uplifting when it's got quite dark connotations to it.
Yeah, well, I think what is interesting about it is that if you I think what if one were to kind of think through it, what probably happened is there was a whole series of etchings that were done in kind of like maybe when Picasso was maybe in his 60s, mid 60s, of the Minotaure going through the labyrinth, and they're some of his best work actually, and they're beautiful pictures. And I'm thinking that she may be referring to those, and in them they're very fanciful drawings essentially. And in some of them the Minotaur is decked out with flowers wrapped around his horns and things, and they become very strange, where they're more sort of bacchanalian, kind of like where the mythology gets sort of twisted into just like a celebration of life, which is sort of very different than the idea of being trapped in in the maze and possibly meeting your death. So I feel like this is a bit, the fragrance almost reflects that, his kind of inspiration possibly of those etchings that he made. And I could be wrong, but when I look at them again, I thought, yeah, they really were interesting. Like, and sometimes there was just like a reclining nude figure, like woman, just placed next to the Minotaur as well too. It's very, very fanciful and interesting. But you're right, it is kind of a funny juxtaposition of ideas, definitely.
I like your highlighting of geranium there, as well as a potential winter sunshine conveying note ingredient.
Yeah,
because I did also give this some thought about what scents, what kind of ingredients in a composition say winter sunshine to me. And obviously, citrus is one of them. The second one I came up with, which will lead us into our second pick, is vetiver. And I think sometimes vetiver has that dry, bright, clean, sometimes a little bit soapy, sometimes a little bit earthy. It kind of glows for me, just vetiver sometimes, which I think does convey that with the idea of winter sunshine to me. And so my second pick is Sillage X by Manos Gerakinis, which it's only just come out. I wish I'd got this before I did my best perfumes of the year, because by Jove, it's good. My favourite vetiver centric perfume was the now sadly discontinued Hiram Green one, and I have to say this is just superb. This has now taken my top vetiver spot. It's just so joyfully resplendent with vetiver. It is just it's really masculine in a way. I don't mean that in that only men can wear it, definitely not. But in the way that, and I do think this was part of what he was going for. Fragrances of the 70s and 80s that men typically wore contained a lot of vetiver. But it has that kind of thrusting energy, that kind of real strong backbone. Incredibly confident perfume. Really full-bodied. For people who always, we hear it quite a lot. People say, "Oh, they don't make perfume like they used to do." They do. Manos Gerakinis do. If you want to smell like, I said, I've been writing a review of it, and I said it smells like hairy chests and sunshine. Hairy chests and sunshine. It makes me think of Tom Selleck in Magnum PI. Like, smell like this, quite sexy, but very cheerful and funny and uplifting, and not like hard work to be around. It's just it's a superb fragrance, absolutely superb. And I think I can see three strands coming through in Manos's work now. Sillage X references Sillage Royal, which was the first scent he did, and it's been released for the 10th anniversary of the brand. And I'm starting to see there's a definite gourmand line, or gourmand thread in his work, which Sillage X doesn't fit into. Then there's like a pretty joyful, flowery, slightly simpler, maybe pretty type of fragrance that is kind of coming through. And then there's this like really robust, really spicy, really fulsome, very classical type of thread that I'm noticing in his work, and this fits into the latter. I just urge you to try it because it's bleaking good, and just I want to spray it on everybody because it's like I like to wear it, but I also like to smell it on other people. So if you hang out with me to any degree, I'll probably spritz you with this and then sniff you all day.
I'm excited. I do have a sample kit of his that I'm ready. I will be trying shortly, so I will get a chance to smell this. Now the bar has been raised pretty high, which is exciting though. That's exciting.
I'm really excited by this one. I think it's so classically elegant, and so they were going for timeless. They got timeless. They hit a bullseye with it. It's really, really good.
I'm not sure about timeless, but another house that's sort of similar to Manos is that's stuck around in the niche world for so long is Arquiste, and Arquiste has really seen quite a change in the market in the time that they've been releasing perfumes. And I discovered one called Legrand Acqua in December of 2022, and I wore it aggressively all that winter simply because, first of all, I think it was the first bottle that I had purchased in a long time, and I think part of me wanted to just feel like I was getting my money's worth out of that decision, but not to take away from like the beauty of the fragrance itself. It's mostly, I wore it just because at the time it felt like a very easy to wear kind of blissful scent, and I think maybe that blissful being the key word there, and why I was wearing it so heavily in the winter, and why it fits this prompt. Something about Legrand Acqua, specifically the Acqua version of the perfume, is that what I was just surprised to discover is once summer rolled around that next year, I started to organize my collection by the seasonability of it all, and I found it to be quite a different fragrance. It's sort of interesting that circumstance of life just kind of makes you see your collection in a different way and specific perfumes in a different way. And I found that warm weather really accentuates, the sour citrus sort of classic eau de cologne kind of qualities about it, and its musky qualities for sure. But what I loved about Legrand Acqua in the winter is that it's got this like dewy wateriness that I feel like is kind of rare in fragrance. It's sort of a textural quality more than a scent profile. I guess adding some legitimacy to its Acqua, name. There must be some sort of waxy aldehyde at play here that's partially to blame for that quality of it, but it's used with such restraint to create this like really plush, breezy sensation in the fragrance. And in cool weather, I think that's very amplified, and it's more like standing above a field of citrus and citrus blossoms that also happens to be by a river. And less of that in your face kind of lemon tree, lemon oil, lemon fruit sort of thing. And I find that to be a very easy to reach for thing when I need that kind of vitamin C in my life. But more so, apart from the citruses, I just really like the idea of something being refreshing and watery and easy to wear in the winter when I don't know about you, but in around the holidays, I'm many people are busy. I'm busy. We're all busy with work, with family matters, and just having something on your shelf that's very not just comforting, but very easy to wear, very refreshing, and sort of like mind resetting is really nice. I guess in that respect, it's sort of similar to the Chanel that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, Legrand Acqua from Arquiste, underrated entry in their lineup, I think.
Mm.
So we're seeing that Adam needs comfort in the winter. I think that's
Yeah, help me. Please help me. Send help. In the form of fragrance and maybe in the form of cookies as well. Cookie. But I don't want to wear a cookie. Gourmands and I, interestingly, do not always get along, with some rare exceptions. I guess I could have brought the one fragrance I think reminds me of like warm baked goods, but I'll save that for like an honorable mention.
I was going to mention that, I just smelled, and I don't know if they're related or not, but I just smelled one of the newer Arquiste, Grove by the Sea, which was just so beautiful. I just smelled it out 2 weeks ago, and there's something about some of the more, I guess you could call them sort of, warm season wares that he's made that are just, they're such stunners. He really does do that so well, and that one in particular would just really floored me. But I also want to mention that I wanted to say you're right that I even said to Carlos when I was there, I said, your brand is really like, you're at a point now where you've got a lot of perfumes now in your line. Like there was a time where, I mean, he really slowly releases stuff. And now he has a lot of fragrances, like a pretty sizable amount of perfumes, So I thought, gosh, he really has been around a while and has seen a lot as a company, right? And that's interesting for this business, right? Isn't it? But anyway, Grove by the Sea is I think also too, the name is a little generic, so I wasn't quite sure, I mean, Grove by the Sea doesn't, I wasn't sure what to expect from it. So I was really kind of blown away by how beautifully aromatic it was. And but anyway, that sounds like a lovely choice though. And I like also how you're generally picking things that almost will kind of lift you up out of the cold, maybe in a way, or provide a cocoon possibly within the cold, maybe.
With an exception, a notable one of my final pick, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Indeed, interesting. Okay, so I will go with something next, which I have to admit I have not worn much at all. In fact, it's a very recent acquisition. It was, in fact, I have to laugh because a very good friend of mine said, "Oh, you know what? I've been wearing this one fragrance like night and day, and from a sample, and so it's so good that I'm going to buy a full bottle." And I rather kind of sneakily said, "Wait a minute, if that thing is that good, I got to buy a bottle, right?" I just felt so impelled, and I thought. And I trust his opinion about things. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be without a bottle if he's going to buy a bottle. I mean, it was that sort of, kind of one-upmanship, I suppose. And when I told him this, he said, "Hey, I hope the hell you didn't buy the last bottle because I didn't buy mine yet." So it became a very funny subject. But anyway, it's a carnation perfume, and there aren't a lot of carnation perfumes left anymore. Or with the exception, of course, that Hiram Green made that really great perfume filter or however it's said, but that this past year, which was wild and really cool. This is by Oriza Legrand, and it's called Royal Oeillet. And let's try to get it in there. What is sort of curious about this one, and and believe me, it was a great blind buy, totally worth it. My friend was right. What I find interesting about the perfume and how it relates to the prompt is that carnation is this is so good. This is so good. Is one art what I find rather cheeky, shall we say, about the company is that carnation isn't even, they don't even bother to list this as a note in the fragrance profile. They're just like cloves, geranium, all these other things. They're like, yeah, close enough. Like they together form the impression of a carnation, which I think, no, that's kind of cool, and also what I do love is that carnation fragrances are very kind of old school, and but what is interesting about this is they pair it together with two kind of one nice sort of a cousin to the smell and one very perpendicular thing. One is rose, which in this case really does add like kind of, there's that great Cocteau Twins name of a song by Cocteau Twins called How to Bring a Blush to the Snow, which I always thought was just such a beautiful name, which made me, I thought of it when you said this prompt, Nicola. This is how you bring a blush to the snow, is you add a little carnation in there. But also that bit of rose, but there's also black pepper in here. And wow, that's a really freaking great combination of carnation and black pepper together. What a cool way to accentuate just like a little bit of a, what is it? It's like just that little bit of something that kind of gives a spark, to an otherwise, what could otherwise be, a nice, bright, kind of a pink to white flower, but put it all together and you've got something that really does fit this prompt really well, which is that it reflects the coldness that you like, that florist's fridge carnation that you put into a buttonhole, or that you might get from a grocery store and put in your dining room or something. But it also has the earthiness of a carnation plus the rosiness of like maybe when the sun is setting from rose, and then that beautiful spark of pepper, which is sort of representative of like fireplaces starting to burn in the background, so it really does have all of those things together. And then it's just a beautiful wear on the skin. It's comforting, but it's also exciting. Like carnations for me have a kind of hopefulness to them. There's something about the smell of carnations that's very much about kind of like waking up in the morning and like you have a very hopeful outlook of the day, sort of, and I guess we want that in winter, right? We do kind of want to feel a bit of hopefulness going forward. So that's my second choice for winter.
I love it. I love that brand. I need to know more of theirs because the fragrances that I've smelled from them I've really, really enjoyed. But I'm not sure what stocks them in the UK, so I should do some research on that because they're very, very cool.
Yeah, good brand.
I don't know exactly what I've uncovered here, but you said that you were reminded of the line from a Cocteau Twins song. And I don't know if I've uncovered that Cocteau Twins pair apparently pretty well with perfume and perfume history, or if just music in general tends to. But so I just out of curiosity Googled that lyric. And I was reminded of the fact that I also like Cocteau Twins, and frankly, I like listening to them in the winter. So here's interesting similarity number one. Interesting similarity number two is that How to Bring a Blush to the Snow by Cocteau Twins is off of their album Victorialand. Victorialand has a tie-in to perfume because it's the name of a unfortunately trashed project by Slumberhouse, because apparently in his experimental process of creating it was set aflame by accident. So there you go. There's a couple of poignant similarities and tie-ins between fragrance and Cocteau Twins.
That's great.
I don't know why I felt the need to illuminate that, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless.
No, that's amazing. Actually, and it's very funny because there's another song from Victorialand which I think of all the time called Through the Dark Months of April and May, which I've always found so interesting because it's such a contradiction to what we normally think like the dark months should be like January and February or something. But it kind of, I've often thought about that like during the gloomiest, rainiest, sort of, spring days. Like I always think of that lyric, and sometimes, anyway, that's another rabbit hole to go down someday. But wow, interesting about the Slumberhouse. We'll have to talk about that some other time there.
It's Elliot though as well, isn't it? April's the
maybe perhaps it is.
Now we really need to uncover if any of the members of that band really liked fragrance, because if they do, I think we have rounded the circle of completeness for that.
They're pretty notoriously, well, I know Liz Fraser is notoriously quiet. Like she does not like do interviews or anything, but Simon Ramond and Robin Guthrie, I'm sure might be more talkative. Yeah, that would be very interesting. It would be.
I don't know the Cocteau Twins reference, but does it fit with this? This is T.S. Eliot. April is the cruelest month.
April is the cruelest month. Yeah. Right, that's from the Wasteland, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
first line from the Wasteland. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had to memorize parts of that when I was in school. Which what does that say about my schooling? Right?
And
They're teaching you that in April and slapping you on the wrist if you forget a little word. April is the cruelest month. I'll show you why.
Yeah, right. But I think the idea, though, was, if I'm not mistaken, that it actually is the same sentiment, I think, which is that, wow, now we're getting pretty deep here. But the idea is that when you're faced with something that's supposed to be beautiful and you're not feeling happy, that's where the cruelty lies, right? Is that you're not in tune with the rest of the world. Yeah, I think that's right. Which does fit what we're discussing, I think, in a way. So.
Yeah.
Nicola, you had an excellent bridge between the last John pick and yours. I don't know how you're going to follow up that version.
I'm not even going to try. I'm going to talk about cookies.
Please come right.
So I'm going to go total opposite, not at all cerebral. I'm going to go gourmand for my next pick. So this is a new fragrance, and it's got the most gorgeous bottle. And I think the bottle colour is slightly winter sunshine anyway. So look at that. Isn't it gorgeous? That's Solar Flair by a brand called Ojar. And I'm getting to know this scent at the minute. And it's a honey and vanilla with a kind of backing of flowers like heliotrope. And it's really interesting. So I've only worn it a couple of times, but I put it on and I think, oh, this isn't very strong. And then half an hour later, I think, wow, this is strong. And then all day, it feels like I'm wrapped in kind of a big blanket of scent, a duvet of scent, a kind of quilt of scent. It really envelops you and makes you feel like you're inhabiting your own little bubble. Really, really diffusive. Really very on that gourmand side of things. It's very sort of honey toned. I was wondering to myself, is it reminiscent of Zoologist's Bee? Yeah, I guess it is a little bit. It does have that kind of honey ice cream feel to it. And a very sort of there's like an energetic layer, which I think is coming from the heliotrope. Kind of like buzzy, polleny kind of energetic layer. And then under it there's this kind of slower but very, very diffusive honey. And then right at the bottom there's a vanilla layer. And it sort of feels like a kind of dessert in the way that it's composed. It's interesting. Like I'm really finding myself pondering it a lot because it's so fulsome and so it is very sweet, but it's also quite buzzy and quite floral, and then there's this kind of resinous element. So it's doing this all at the same time, and yeah, I'm trying to wrap my brain around it, but I figure it is a scent that would definitely make you feel warm and cozy and like you've got a bit of sunshine on you. So that's Solar Fly by Ojar.
It sounds beautiful. It sounds really beautiful.
Sounds like there's a lot of movement in that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly really interesting, and I really applaud them for really going out and they haven't half-assed it at all. The honey isn't, well, certainly not to my nose. It's not, sometimes honey can be a bit urine-like, a bit sort of animalic. It's not. It's not as furry as that. It's more like honey, the sweet product. So yeah, it is. If you like scents of that ilk, I think it would be well worth trying.
Well, so I said before that I don't typically tend to gravitate towards gourmands, but in the context of this discussion, I did think of one that bucks some usual gourmand trends, but also strikes me as really great for this topic, which is Winter of '99 by Kerosene. It wasn't one that I planned on discussing, but then just the way we've been talking reminded me of it. Definitely a vanillic gourmand, but one that also happens to work in the unusual note in perfume of molasses, and in a pretty spot on way too, more of like a like a black strap molasses. It's pretty dark stuff. And I just wanted to give it some flowers here because I really am drawn to molasses in cooking and desserts specifically, and I really like those old English, but also like New Englandish kind of molasses heavy desserts that your grandfather eats all the time. Those kinds of foods are appealing to me, and molasses in general is just such an underrated smell and taste. But one thing I will say about Winter of '99 from Kerosene is that it really cuts into the sweetness quite heavily with some very dark, I won't say unusual woody accords, but woody accords that aren't always paired with gourmand notes. So I really respect it for that, on top of the nailing the smell of molasses. So my final pick was the sort of diversion in comparison to everything else I've brought. So here's the story. This is not a fragrance that I own, but I'd love to sometime, so I won't be holding it up. But in my review from 2 years ago, I called Fox in the Flowerbed by Imaginary Authors this, the happiest aldehydic floral. And I definitely still stand by that description. It's interesting, this prompt was about winter sunshine, and here I am bringing a perfume that, it's literally has a note listed alpine air. So it's sort of doubling down on the winter part of the prompt. And I think there's a chilliness that's definitely associated with this perfume. It's one of those alpine air in the note pyramid being, one of those, special Imaginary Authors notes, the imaginary note that they put into everything that, is part of their marketing materials. And I think there is some truth in advertising here, though. There is a chilliness to the fragrance, a chill in a way. And how does this relate to winter sunshine? I would say that this is, apart from that chilly air kind of accord that does find its way in here, this is Josh Myers of the house doing Jean-Claude Elena's like watercolor florals, which I think maybe if we put ourselves in that kind of mode of thought, we can kind of see some more direct parallels to the theme here. Those like lush but restrained and minimal approaches to floral accords that are somehow both rounded in their overall body and presence in the fragrance, while also being kind of glassy and not too heavy on the skin. I guess in that respect, there is sort of a similarity between it and Legrand Acqua, where it's a very light but somehow present floral. I definitely feel as though my spirit was moved by this perfume enough to kind of fulfill the winter sunshine prompt, where it's a happy fragrance to me, despite being kind of chill and, to some extent austere in the way that it's constructed. But I think the overall effect is still, fairly joyous and cheerful. That's taking aside the fact that the visuals that accompany the bottle and packaging are stunning. They're a fox in a literal meadow flower bed that's done in a very cute kind of sort of overall pleasant kind of way. And I think that it captures something of a spirit in the perfume. So it might not be winter sunshine like citruses, but it excuse me, but it definitely has sun shining on the alpine meadow kind of associations for me. In my review, I said that the early dry downs, honey and alabinum notes are remarkably luminescent, like golden hour light. And I think that's probably where I get this association with winter sunshine. So I really highly recommend that one from the Imaginary Authors line. It felt like very much an accomplishment for him, where I think he's always been talented. He's always, surprised us in terms of what he releases next. But this really felt like he studied some classical arrangements in florals and then applied that with his more modern approach to perfume making, and it really is stunning, the result. I would say the honey accord adds just the right amount of sweetness. It kind of resembles what is that? Is it Carven or no Cartier's Landvol? That's a famous honey perfume where the honey is like almost rubbery in texture and thick. And he accomplishes that kind of approach to honey here again without making something that's like too heavy bodied. So I thought it was a really big accomplishment for Josh and his skills as a perfumer. So I recommend it really highly for any time of year.
Yeah, I'll second that motion because I really like that one as well. It's a lovely fragrance, really.
Yeah, I can't believe I still have not smelled it yet, and I will make every effort to do so. No, it sounds wonderful. And I remember actually the graphics were just so yeah, like you were saying, there was something kind of adorable, but also I remember they were sort of I was going to say highly graphic, which sounds silly, but very almost like travel poster-esque, which was very cool about the image of the fox kind of jumping over the foliage and flowers and stuff, which I thought was really cool. Sort of a little like fiendish or devilish about it, which was very attractive and interesting, from a narrative perspective. But yeah,
I think as a brand, they're like just super well conceived from, every aspect of their kind of aesthetic has been really thought about. Really can it really appeals to me, and I want to read all the books by the imaginary authors that they reference as well.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I wish this was real.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway,
Category books that are failing to deliver on their promise. Yeah, I really want to read those too.
John, what's your final pick for us?
Yeah, so I picked something that was a bit of a surprise to me, and but I did some smelling and I smelled and I thought, no, this makes sense for what we're talking about today, and it's also a bit of a departure, I think, from some of the other things I've been smelling, but well, or maybe not, I don't know. So I picked something that's rather classic, although this is a slightly newer version. You can tell by the top it's a Guerlain. This is a eau de toilette version of Vol de Nuit, which is the sort of very classic perfume. I believe it was made in the 30s, right? If I'm not mistaken. It's a slightly lighter version of the original eau de parfum, and oh man, this is such a beautiful fragrance. This is very much a kind of a galbanum spring floral, and so it's a very classic sort of perfume structure. And maybe it isn't such a departure from where I was headed with this in a way, because it's got those mixture of temperatures in a way which I think are kind of important, at least to me, from this prompt, which is that it something like galbanum is always very cold, and so is something like a lot of spring flowers like iris and hyacinth and things like that. But there's also a big chunk of like spiciness in the center of this as well. And I believe there's vetiver as well. I wanted to sort of check on, sorry, it's like a patchouli and some woody notes, but and the thing that sort of sits sort of in the middle, which I love, and is again not had a hate. I'm hoping for like a resurgence of narcissus as a flower note, where we just are the market's flooded with narcissus perfumes. I'd be like ecstatic because I love the smell of narcissus. But it sits right in the center, and neither being too cold or too hot or anything like that. But there's something I think what I like about this is that I think that when you are wearing perfume and you are out in the cold and you see something like sunshine here being kind of maybe a bit of pleasure that you get despite the cold, maybe, is that it's sort of reflective of that great winter jacket that you have, maybe, or the big old scarf that you have that keeps you sort of could create a bit of a cocoon or a safety pocket, a bubble, whatever it is for yourself as you go out, so it kind of protects you. And this to me is sort of something like that, is more or less creating a sort of a protective layer or zone for yourself. And it's a little bit of fall, it's a little bit of spring, and it's so pretty, but it's deep and it's woody and spicy and floral and all of those things combined. I mean, because it is sort of classical perfumery, it's got a little bit of everything in it. And there's something wonderful about something that has all of that whole melange of all that stuff in there and creating a very full-bodied experience that feels a lot like taking a long walk in the snow, and you are sort of like actually you feel your heart beating, and you are actually your skin is warming up. This perfume reminds me of that. It's got all of that stuff in it, and it has a lot of life blood in it, sort of. And so I think it really suits this idea a lot. In fact, I'm really curious now to wear this in the cold. We're supposed to get some very, very cold temperatures later this week, and I really want to see. Normally, to me, I would wear this like in spring, and carefully, because it's a very strong perfume, and I'd only wear a little bit. But I'm like, no, this would be really interesting to actually wear in winter now, and I do think it reflects that there's enough joy in it to really kind of that reflects that notion of the sun in winter, but also that feeling of protectedness, which I think is also part of the joy of this idea as well too.
Brilliant. What a great selection we've had there. And I really like that we've approached the topic in very different ways, and we've had very different styles of perfume, very different ingredients and accords mentioned there. So before we sign off, I want to know, are there any more? Are there any honourable mentions, Adam, that you'd like to bring? I know you snuck your kerosene in there, so
I did sneak the kerosene in there. Why don't if either of you want to mention one, why don't you? Oh, well, actually, you know what? No, one did just come to me. Neroli Portofino from Tom Ford. Just a classic presence in Tom Ford's line that, frankly, feels like a very vacation in a bottle kind of fragrance for me, and can't really beat that any time of year for my taste, at least.
I do have one really quick I can mention, which is I just finally bought a bottle after going through tons of samples, but a really wonderful sweet green tomato fragrance, if you can, green tomato leaf fragrance, if you can imagine. This is Metaboles, which is made by a Swiss company called Isfarkand, which I adore. It's very under the radar, but then again, they have a lot of diehard fans, and absolutely love this perfume. And there's something about, again, spring, summery smell. Tomato leaf I love it. It's a very niche, small kind of not often used note in perfumery, but it for some reason made a lot of sense to pull this one out for this idea. What about you, Nicola? What's your?
It's so random. Who thinks tomato leaf for winter sunshine? I love it. It's brilliant. Yeah. You've convinced me. So I'm not trying to overegg the pudding, but I've got two.
Please.
Because I couldn't narrow it down really. Solis by Memoirs London. Really like this perfume. I wanted to mention an amber. This has got amber in it. It's got a lovely, uplifting, vaguely citrusy opening, but then it goes into, it's got geranium in it, which I don't like geranium, and this has got geranium in it. I really like it. A bourbon whiskey, juniper berries, a bit of rose, a bit of orris, and then this amber and agar wood in the base. Now, what I really like about it is it gives that Eastern style perfumery vibe without being too heavy, without being too kind of on the nose. I find it just really comforting, and it's a bit of a scarf of a fragrance, kind of you wrap yourself up in it, but it's not too shouty. I just really appreciate that. I think there's a really nice balance to the composition which really appeals, and it has that burnished ambery feel with the agar wood kind of humming away in the background. It's just lovely. And then one I just wanted to mention, because we can't have a Fragrantica Talks episode without sneaking a Pierre Guillaume fragrance in. Tonka Bodycon. Now I mention this because I want to know if this is just me, and I'd like our listeners and readers to help us. This smells like tinsel to me. It smells like tinsel, and I've got this synesthesia thing where when I smell a fragrance, I sometimes get flashes of colour. And I can't get actually Pierre Guillaume fragrances do this quite a lot for me. But I can't get the idea of tinsel out of my head when I smell this. It's glinting light. It's kind of like little motes and chinks and little sparkles of light in dim, in a dim room, and it's so beautiful, and it's so. I think maybe it's not quite sunshine, but in terms of a tonka for winter, it's spot on because it's got that coziness, that envelopingness, but there's this tinsel feel to it, and I just can't get it out of my head. So if anybody else smells tinsel when they smell this, please can you let me know so I don't feel quite so much like a lunatic.
And what's the name of it again? Sorry. The
Bodycon.
Tonka. Okay.
Bodycon. Yeah.
Hold on.
PG-31.
Okay. That is, I love when you said it reminds you of tinsel, because of course like that, makes me think of a million different, like any number of colors, right? Of course, and also that was the name of my first cat, but
No. I love that as a name for a cat.
it's a very good name for a cat.
Awesome. So thank you both so much for rising to the challenge of this slightly short notice and slightly off the wall prompt that I sent you. I think this has been super interesting for me, at least, to hear your different takes on it, and I do think we've all approached it very differently. So yeah, just love talking to you about it, both.
Very rewarding topic, and I appreciate it, and it actually made me kind of stretch my thinking out quite a bit. So it was great. Thank you, Nicola.